Story 1. I did the firing. I was the sous chef of a large reception hall, meaning I served food to hundreds and hundreds of guests. One party had a big seafood display: shrimp, oysters, crab legs, and vodka, all in a giant decorative box of ice. When that portion of dinner service was finished, 2 new waiters were tasked with returning the big ice box and leftovers to the kitchen and dish pit. They dumped the ice back into the ice machine. The contaminated ice. It even had some discarded shells. I saw it happen. I had to show them the door immediately and have a serious talk with their head waiter. It lasted 2 hours, tops. Those idiots would have harmed someone. Imagine you have a severe shellfish allergy and the ice in your glass of water is lethal. To add some satisfaction to this story, I'll say that back then I was very Gordon Ramsay with how I ran things. I gave them such pointed, crushing choice words before I kicked them out that it was almost beautiful. If I remember correctly, we had nearly 800 guests that night, while the building had 2 ice machines. With one down, we quickly emptied the other and had to send people out in a rush to buy ice. It was a disaster. The ice machines were a good 5-minute walk from each other, so during the rush, it caused all kinds of unusual food traffic and bottlenecks. I got a fat envelope of bonus cash for my actions that day. Oh man, that was awfully shellfish of those 2 waiters. Okay, thank you, I'll be here all night. Story 2. My first job was in a small grocery store and my boss asked a coworker to do the dishes in the bakery, baking pans, etc. She replied, "I only do my own dishes. Somebody else put these here so I'm not doing them. I'm serious. Fire me if you want, I won't do them." Boss says, "Okay then, don't bother finishing your shift. Goodbye." Pitching in to clean the bakery was part of the job. It was in the job description. She was one of a couple people staffing the bakery and was asked to help with the dishes while others did a multitude of other jobs in the department. This was a small operation with no formal dishwasher position. I cleaned those dishes many times. The boss cleaned those dishes many times. This was absolutely a case of someone being delegated a task to help move things along and flat out refusing. Personally, I support the decision. You get paid to do your job, not refuse it. There are plenty of other jobs out there with that attitude. Story 3. I had a coworker explain to our supervisor how he found this great loophole for making extra money. If a customer had exact change, he'd just pocket the cash and cancel the order on the register. It's called counting the pennies, and it's been around forever. Decades ago, I worked for a cleaning company. One of her clients was a fine dining restaurant owned by a family. The mother and father, one of their daughters, and her husband. He was an obnoxious man. Always had a new car every 6 months, Rolex, the works, and an ego to match. My boss said the owner complained that they were seemingly constantly packed but not making much money. One morning, when we got there, a crew was running cable through the dropped ceiling. They told us not to tell anybody what they were doing, which was easy because they had no idea. It turns out they were installing hidden cameras. They found the son-in-law was robbing the place blind. He was counting the pennies, taking payments in cash, and discarding the receipts. In common practice, the thief kept track of how much he was taking by putting a penny in the drawer for every dollar they stole. At the end of the shift, they would count the pennies and take that many dollars from the till. That way, they weren't constantly sneaking money into their pockets. This is how he affords his lifestyle. The parents retired and sold the restaurant shortly after. Story 4. The office hired this new guy, who was obviously a bad fit. We would often give people a chance despite interviewing poorly. We hardly had any issues come up. But this one guy failed the test for ice, was obviously baked during the interview, obviously hasn't showered in over a week, and had no self-awareness whatsoever. This guy literally walked into a wall while looking right at it. Regional hired him and gave him to me to work in a relatively dangerous site. I put him through the training, got him licensed, and even drove him to the site just to show him around and get him familiar with security procedures and safety protocols. He didn't retain any of that information and would repeat the same question over and over. I'd pick up my truck from the office and pick him up from home because he lives like 2 blocks from the office and doesn't have a car to get to the work site. That's fine. I don't mind driving people to the site. Keeps me out of the office doing busy work. But during the ride, he confessed that he lost his license because of multiple DUIs and sold his car to buy illegal substances. I told him to keep the illegal stuff at home and only come to me about it if he needed to go to rehab. The owners of the business were always willing to work with dependents and try to get them clean. So our company partnered with a rehab center that had a 6-month program. I explained this and other resources to help him out. Dude looks at me dead in the eye and says, "I don't want to get clean." I then told him to just come to work sober and don't allow his usage to interfere with work. He was 100% sober at this time. We get to the site and I have him pull out his company ID, which you can use to gain access to the site. I drove him to the main building where I would show him how to clock in and begin his shift. But he had to take a whiz, so I stopped at one of the auxiliary buildings and showed him where the restroom was. 10 minutes passed, and I figured he was taking a dump. 20 minutes passed, and he's still in there. I went to check on him and found him in the bathroom stall with the door open, completely bare, and a needle hanging from his arm. He had also played with himself. I call an ambulance because I'm not dealing with that. They figured he OD'd after he passed out and started vomiting, so they took him to the ER. As soon as he was carted off to the hospital, I left the job site and headed back to the office to file his termination paperwork. I didn't even have the chance to get him locked in. I had a hunch where this story was going when the dude said he didn't want to get clean, but I never thought he'd pull a stunt like that at work. Talk about unexpected twists on the job. Story 5. Dude's first day on a team next to mine gets an assignment. As soon as the lead leaves the area, he leans over to another guy and threatens that if he doesn't do his work for him, he's going to kick his bum after work. I got up to the manager and we walked over and escorted him out. He was there for 2 hours. On his way out, he's knocking over chairs and screaming that he'll be waiting for us in the parking lot. He was nuts. And yes, he was actually waiting for us. It was 11:30 at night and sure enough, he was standing in the parking lot, mumbling and still angry, maybe buzzed. But there were also 12 or so of us, so he just shouted some things and then walked off. I never saw him again. Other stories off the top of my head related to people getting fired. Guy drew in Sharpie in a bathroom stall a large rendition of the company's mascot doing the dirty with another of the company's main characters, and was caught because he had clearly been practicing in a notebook he had at his desk and was caught giggling and drawing more versions of it during work hours. I went to set up a focus test, like the one-way glass that looks into a conference room. I went into the back room to set up, and there were 2 testers going to town in the conference table shouting feedback at each other. We had just hired a ton of new testers for a big unannounced game. That evening, a bunch of people were waiting for the train. Easily 15 to 20 people from work, including a couple higher-ups, all standing around, and one of the new guys, who I guess didn't recognize anyone in the first day, was loudly and excitedly telling his friend on the phone details about the game. Funny enough, not a member of QA but one of our legal team members got fired for showing people private photos on her phone in the break room. Story 6. The new IT guy at a small, 20 employees, newspaper I worked at. I showed up early and opened the office. The new IT guy showed up next for his first shift. He was totally, utterly buzzed. Lurching, stumbling, reeking, giggly, and slurring. At 8:15 a.m., way beyond a hangover. He confessed that he'd had a couple of drinks last night to celebrate his new job. The managing editor came in and paged the IT guy into his office to talk about the job. I hadn't said a word to anyone about him. Give him enough rope and all that. He was finished by 9:15. I walked home through downtown around 5 that afternoon. I ran into IT guy outside one of those old men's dive bars. He was maybe 28. He was all messed up again. He told me he'd had a couple of drinks to mourn the loss of his new job. I don't remember his proper name. I'd like to find his LinkedIn to see what became of him. Story 7. First day at work, hired by temp agency. Me and one other guy put stuff in boxes, taped them shut, and stacked boxes on a pallet. He can't keep up. Can barely use a tape gun and decides it's time for a break. Goes to the lunchroom and had lunch. It was the boss's lunch. He stole the guy's meal his wife prepared for him. The boss man came over 15 minutes later and wanted to know who ate his barbecue. He had sticky fingers and barbecue on his shirt, but he denied it. I just looked at him and the boss and said, I hope it was a good one, man. Story 8. I was on a new team hired for corporate sales. They trained us as a group. We were given the task of creating a presentation with graphs and charts to show how we present to a group and given pointers on how to improve. One guy shows up an hour late, walks in, says he's tired from the drive-in and says he needs a coffee before settling in. We are in suit and tie and he's wearing a dress shirt with a huge eagle on the front and jeans. He comes back a few minutes later and when asked to present, he says he didn't prepare anything, but he's happy to answer any questions they may have about presentations. We all looked at each other in disbelief. Fired on the spot by the manager. I heard that they asked him to return his laptop and he stiffed them for months before they sent a repo man to his door to pick it up. It seems like the dude thought he could impress the bosses by playing the seasoned pro card, but his style was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole in the corporate world. I can't blame him for the effort though. So what's your take on hiring someone like that? If you'd give it a shot, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more epic office facepalm stories. Story 9. I had a friend who managed a bar. She got caught on camera staying behind with a male customer after closing, drinking bottles of Crystal without paying for them and doing the dirty with them in the bar area. The owner saw it on camera the next morning, went to the bar, found the main door unlocked and opened it. Money still in the till and she was asleep in a room upstairs. He banged on the door until she woke up. They had an argument and she walked out and went to her parents' house. She never went back, not even to get her clothes, etc. She later admitted she didn't go back, as she knew he'd find several thousand pilfered takings under her mattress. I don't hang out with her anymore. Story 10. He showed up to work after a weekend ice bender on a schizophrenic episode telling us that people were after him and us. Then wandering around the building with a pipe and a box cutter, getting more and more aggravated as more of us changed. Story 11. He came out from the back and joined us while we were talking about work-related stuff, and he had a beer can in his hand. I immediately stopped talking about what I was talking about before and asked him, Dude, what are you doing? Him. Drinking juice? What does it look like? My boss. That's not juice, dude. That's a spiked seltzer. It's booze. Him. Okay, so? Takes another sip. I tried taking it from him as he took another sip from it. He then backed away, swallowed, and said, Hey, nah, bro, don't do that. You do that again, I'll shank you with my pocket blade. Because he thought it wasn't a big deal. It was not even legal. He was fired on the spot and had to be dragged out because he was adamant it wasn't a big deal, and threatened to attack me with his bladed weapon when I tried taking it from him. Story 12. I was providing quality assurance for a place that evaluated operations involving explosives. I was leaving soon, so my replacement was hired. I recommended against his hiring because I'd heard bad things and he seemed shady, but they hired him anyway. So on his first day, I was tasked with training him on the job. He was already highly qualified in explosives, more qualified than I was, in fact. Anyway, as we're evaluating a couple of guys working the internals of a live AIM-120 missile, this clown's cell phone goes off in his pocket. To even get into the bay we were in, you have to walk past about 4 signs that say leave all electronic devices outside because even tiny amounts of EM emissions can set off the explosives, especially when the covers are removed or disassembled. So I wrote up my replacement with a direct safety violation, and he didn't have a job at the time he got back to the office. Quality assurance's reputation was in the crapper for months. That idiot could have gotten 5 people injured, including himself. Well, that was an explosive first day of work. Story 13. I was a manager for a cosmetics store at the mall. On my day off, I got a call from one of my longtime employees that our new hire had tried to fight a girl who came into our store because she was the ex-girlfriend of the new hire's fiancé. I had to come in on my day off, pregnant and starving because I hadn't time to eat yet, to deal with this absolute middle school nonsense. When I got there, the new hire and her mom were just chilling by the register. Like, fighting people while you're working is a totally normal, everyday occurrence. The mom had the audacity to say to me, she didn't have any business coming in here. I had to inform her that her store was open to the public, so she had every right to come in, regardless of her motives. Then I had to fire the new hire. The crazy thing was, in her deluded redneck mind, she thought I was coming in to check on her. I actually hate that I missed the fight because my longtime employee said she threw the weakest, saddest little punch. She looked like Mr. Burns trying to fight. Story 14. During the first day of training orientation, the trainer had us all read a paragraph from their guidebook. It was very 3rd grade, but it kept us from falling asleep from boredom. After a lunch break, one girl was suddenly gone, as was our trainer. 2 stern-faced HR reps were in there and asked us what had happened during the first few hours and if anyone had felt picked on. I guess the girl had spun a tale that the trainer had singled her out and made fun of her when she didn't know the answer to a question. It was really bizarre. There were no questions asked. We were just taking turns reading aloud from a boring manual. Anyway, after the class confirmed that the girl's story had not happened, the trainer was let in and the girl wasn't seen again. It was just strange. Story 15. I worked at a movie theater as a teenager. Some suits from corporate offices were at the theater doing stuff, including a really beautiful young woman in early to mid-20s, who was in the group wearing a short jacket and a knee-length pencil skirt. We all had radios and I was taking tickets near where the suits were hanging out, talking to my boss when my radio crackled and I heard, "Holy crap, guys. Did you see the bum on that girl from the corporate office?" She blushed very red, my manager went very pale, and my coworker got very fired. Pro tip. If you're going to drop some wild comments, make sure you're tuned into a whole different station than the bigwigs. Story 16. I was hiring for a night audit position at a small hotel. It was an extremely easy job that involved sitting on your bum most of the time, as long as you answered the phone and greeted anyone who came to the desk during the overnight period. The only real work they usually do is run one single program that balanced out everything for the day. Just after he was hired, female employees at her sister hotel down the street started getting calls while they were on shift from a man who was threatening them with seriously horrific and graphic threats. Really sick stuff. The employees are terrified because they work alone, and after multiple calls, they end up calling the police about the issue. The police come to investigate, are able to easily and quickly trace where the call was coming from, and it ended up being the new guy. It completely blew my mind. Kid just turned legal, just out of high school, and due to the graphic nature of the threats and illegal utilization of personal information obtained through his new position, he ended up getting some serious charges that likely screwed up the rest of his adult life. Story 17. Coworker got fired within a week of being hired. I was still helping train him, because he bumped someone else's car in the parking lot and then lied about it. There was barely any damage to either car, but he didn't say anything when it happened, and when the other car's owner reported it, he lied, apparently forgetting about the security cameras. Dude could have just gone to the front desk and said, "Hey, I just bumped someone's car. Can we find out whose it is and I'll pay to fix the damages?" And again, it was less than $50 of damage to the other car, or he could have owned up to it when confronted about it. But instead, he got tossed out on his bum and lost a job that started at $60,000, and since he was on an H-1B visa and couldn't find a new job soon enough, he had to move back to India. The company was totally in the right though. In his job role, he'd have the ability to make the sort of mistakes that could be fixed very easily if reported right away, but could cost the company days or weeks of lost productivity if ignored or hidden. And he just demonstrated that he'll not only fail to report his own mistakes, but will lie about them when caught. Story 18. We hired a girl we will call Crazy Sarah. On her first shift, she clogged the toilet in the staff bathroom because she was throwing up and had an ED. That's super awkward because that's a serious issue. She made it more awkward because she was talking about it so openly, and giggling like she was a woman in a Monistat commercial. The very next day, she's eating 2 entrees at 11 a.m., like a steak dinner and a club sandwich together. I had to go up to her and be like, "This is awkward. I don't know how to say this without sounding like a monster, but you literally just told everyone in your outdoor voice that you throw up everything you eat. And here you are, having a steak." At this point, I gagged a bit, collected myself, dinner and a sandwich, and I'm not getting a plumber again. Plus, it's super awkward for everyone here knowing where that food is going in 10 minutes. She laughed and explained she changed her mind and isn't bulimic anymore because her new sugar daddy has a gainer fixation and wants to make her obese. She said girls who date gainers make the most money. I looked this up and it's sadly true. There are some dudes out there paying women a salary to get fat for them. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know. So we awkwardly resume our shift, and after she's done for the day, I notice she sits down to have a glass of wine with some guy who's a known womanizer and substance dependent. One glass of wine turns into 5. They have taken several trips to the bathroom together. The evening bartender cuts her off. It's their first meeting. It's probably about 6 p.m. at this point. Crazy Sarah tells her off and exclaims, "I work here." It was her second or third day. The bartender just blinked at her and said, "BRB," and walked to the back where the owner was. 20 seconds later, the owner came out and told her to pack her stuff and get out. And on top of that, she was not welcome back on the property. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. Have you ever seen someone get fired on the spot? You're going to scratch your head with story 6. See you on that video.